The blizzard came out of nowhere that December afternoon in 1881, swallowing the mountain pass whole and taking with it any sense of direction, any hope of finding the trail back down to safety. Rebecca Vaughn had been collecting medicinal herbs in the foothills when the first flakes began to fall, innocent and light. But within minutes, the wind had picked up with a fury that sent her stumbling through drifts already knee-deep. Her horse had spooked and bolted, leaving her alone with nothing but a thin wool coat and a basket of useless plants. Now, hours later, she could barely feel her fingers anymore, could barely keep her eyes open against the stinging snow that seemed to come from every direction at once. She pressed on because stopping meant dying, pressed on because somewhere down below, someone might notice she had not come home. Vincent Xavier had noticed the moment the sun began to set, and Rebecca's mare came galloping back to Benton without her rider. The rangy cowboy had been mending fence on the property adjacent to the Vaughn family homestead when he heard the commotion, saw Rebecca's father Samuel running out to catch the frightened animal. Vincent dropped his tools and ran over, his heart already racing with a fear he did not want to name. Rebecca was the schoolteacher, 23 years old with auburn hair that caught the sunlight like burnished copper, and she had smiled at him just that morning when he tipped his hat to her on Main Street. That smile had sustained him through the afternoon, through the monotonous work of fixing posts and stringing wire, and now the thought of her somewhere out in that growing storm made his chest tighten until he could barely breathe. Samuel Vaughn was a hard man, weathered by years of frontier life, but his hands shook as he examined his daughter's horse. "She went up to Sawback Ridge," he said, his voice rough. "Always goes up there for her herbs. She should have been back hours ago." Vincent did not hesitate. "I will go after her." "That storm is getting worse by the minute," Samuel said, but there was desperate hope in his eyes. "You will need supplies, a good horse. Take Thunder from my stable. He knows those mountains better than any animal in 3 counties. Within 20 minutes, Vincent had gathered everything he could think of. Extra blankets, rope, dried meat, matches wrapped in oilcloth, a flask of whiskey for warmth, and his rifle in case of wolves or worse. Thunder was a massive gray gelding with intelligent eyes, and the horse seemed to understand the urgency as Vincent swung into the saddle. Rebecca's mother, Catherine, pressed a small silver locket into his hand. "She always wears one like this," she whispered. "If you find her, if she is confused or hurt, show her this. She will know we sent you." The ride up into the mountains was brutal from the start. The snow was already a foot deep on the lower slopes, and the wind howled through the pines with a voice that sounded almost human. Vincent pulled his hat down low and wrapped his bandana over his nose and mouth, but the cold still found ways to creep in, settling into his bones with malicious intent. Thunder plowed through the drifts with determination, his breath coming in great cloudy bursts, and Vincent leaned forward to encourage him, to urge him on even as visibility dropped to almost nothing. Rebecca had found a shallow overhang in the rocks, barely enough to be called shelter, but it blocked some of the wind. She huddled there as darkness fell, trying to remember everything her father had taught her about surviving in harsh conditions. Do not fall asleep. Keep moving your fingers and toes. Stay positive. But it was so hard to stay positive when the cold seemed to seep into her very soul, when her body shook so violently she thought her teeth might crack from chattering. She thought of her students, the children who depended on her to teach them reading and arithmetic. She thought of her parents, who had already lost one child to scarlet fever years ago. She thought of Vincent Xavier, the quiet cowboy with green eyes who always seemed to be watching her from a respectful distance, who had once helped her carry supplies to the schoolhouse, and had blushed when their hands accidentally touched. Why was she thinking of him now? Perhaps because in what might be her final hours, her mind wanted to dwell on something that made her feel warm, something that made her heart beat faster for reasons other than fear. She had noticed him noticing her, had felt the weight of his gaze, and had not minded it at all. There was something solid about Vincent, something dependable. He was not like the other young men in Benton who were all swagger and empty promises. He worked hard, kept to himself mostly, and when he did speak, his words carried weight. The night stretched on forever. Vincent refused to stop searching even when the darkness made it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. He called Rebecca's name until his throat was raw, listened for any response over the shrieking wind. Thunder moved carefully, testing each step, and Vincent trusted the horse's instincts completely. They covered what he estimated was 3 miles up the main trail before it became completely impassable, then backtracked and tried a different route. Every minute that passed was a minute Rebecca was out in this frozen hell, and the thought drove him forward even when exhaustion began to pull at him. Dawn came gray and reluctant, the storm still raging but with slightly better visibility. Vincent's beard was crusted with ice, his fingers numb inside his gloves, but he kept searching. He worked in a grid pattern now, methodical despite his desperation, checking every ravine and outcropping he could find. Thunder was tiring, so Vincent dismounted and led the horse, breaking trail on foot even though it meant sinking thigh-deep into fresh powder. "Rebecca!" he shouted again and again. "Rebecca Vaughn!" She heard something. Through the fog of cold and exhaustion, through the constant noise of the wind, Rebecca heard her name. At first she thought she was hallucinating, that her mind was playing cruel tricks, but then she heard it again, closer. She tried to call back, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. She forced herself to stand, to move out from her inadequate shelter, to wave her arms even though they felt like lead weights. Vincent saw movement, a dark shape against the white. His heart leaped and he ran, stumbling through the snow, pulling Thunder along behind him. And then he saw her face, pale and frost-bitten but alive, those brown eyes looking at him with disbelief and desperate relief. "Vincent," she managed to say, and then her legs gave out. He caught her before she hit the ground, gathering her into his arms. She was so cold, her lips blue, her whole body shaking uncontrollably. "I have got you," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "You are safe now, I have got you." He carried her to where Thunder waited and wrapped her in every blanket he had brought, then lifted her onto the saddle and climbed up behind her, holding her close against his chest. The descent was even more dangerous than the climb had been, because now he was exhausted, and she needed to get warm immediately, but stopping was not an option. He opened his coat and pulled her inside against him, sharing his body heat, and urged Thunder into the fastest walk the horse could safely manage. Rebecca drifted in and out of consciousness. She was aware of strong arms around her, of warmth slowly seeping back into her core, of a steady heartbeat against her ear. She was aware of a low voice murmuring to her, telling her to hold on, telling her they were almost there, telling her she was going to be all right. She tried to respond, but the words would not come, so she just pressed closer to that warmth and let herself believe him. The storm began to break as they reached the lower elevations. By the time Benton came into view, the snow had stopped entirely and pale sunlight was filtering through the clouds. People came running when they saw Vincent riding down Main Street with Rebecca bundled in his arms. Samuel and Catherine were there instantly, tears streaming down their faces as they helped get their daughter down from the horse. "She needs warmth and hot liquids," Vincent said, though he was swaying on his feet himself. She was exposed for at least 12 hours, maybe more. I found her about 2 miles up Sawback, on the eastern slope. Dr. Harrison pushed through the crowd and took charge, directing that Rebecca be brought to his office immediately. Vincent tried to follow, but his legs finally gave out and he sat down hard in the muddy street. Someone brought him coffee. Someone else threw a blanket around his shoulders, and he sat there shaking, only now allowing himself to feel the terror of the past night, the overwhelming relief that he had found her alive. He did not remember being helped to the boarding house where he rented a room. He did not remember someone pulling off his frozen boots or covering him with quilts. He slept for 16 hours straight and woke to find half the town calling him a hero, a title that made him deeply uncomfortable. He had not been heroic. He had simply done what needed to be done, what anyone who cared about Rebecca would have done. Except no one else had gone out into that storm. No one else had searched through the night. The town knew it even if Vincent was too modest to acknowledge it, and the story spread quickly. The quiet cowboy who loved the schoolteacher from afar had risked his life to save her, had refused to give up even when any reasonable person would have turned back. Rebecca woke in her own bed, warm and safe, with her mother sitting beside her holding her hand. "Vincent," she whispered, and Catherine smiled through fresh tears. "He is fine, sweetheart. He is resting. He saved your life." "I know," Rebecca said softly. "I want to see him." "In a few days, when you are stronger. Dr. Harrison says you will recover completely, though you will have some frostbite on your fingers and toes. It could have been so much worse." It took 3 days before Rebecca was well enough to receive visitors beyond her immediate family. Vincent came in the late afternoon, hat in hand, looking scrubbed and nervous. He stood in the doorway of her room as if unsure whether he should come in, and Rebecca felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. "Please," she said, gesturing to the chair beside her bed. "Sit with me." He did, perching on the edge of the chair, his hat balanced on his knee. Up close she could see the healing frostbite on his own face, the exhaustion still lingering in his eyes. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Alive, thanks to you." She reached out and took his hand before she could talk herself out of it, felt his fingers close around hers with gentle care. "Vincent, you saved my life. I do not have words big enough to thank you." "You do not need to thank me," he said roughly. "I could not have lived with myself if I had not tried, if I had lost you." He stopped, as if realizing he had said too much, and color rose in his cheeks. Rebecca tightened her grip on his hand. "Why did you come after me? And please do not tell me it was just the right thing to do." "My father said you rode out into that blizzard without a second thought. You could have died." He was quiet for a long moment, his green eyes searching her face. "I came after you because the thought of a world without you in it was unbearable," he finally said. "I know I have no right to feel that way. I know you probably think of me as just some cowboy who works the next ranch over. But Rebecca, I have been in love with you since the first day I saw you, when you were reading to those children under the oak tree by the schoolhouse. The way you smiled at them, the way you made learning seem like magic. I fell so hard I have never gotten back up." Her breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such raw honesty, such vulnerability. "Vincent, I have noticed you too. I have hoped you might speak to me, might ask if you could call on me properly. I think I have been waiting for you to find the courage." He laughed, a sound of pure relief. "I have faced down stampedes and outlaws, but the thought of talking to you terrified me more than anything. I was sure you were too good for a man like me. A man who would ride into a blizzard to save someone. A man who would search all night and never give up. Vincent, you are exactly the kind of man I have been hoping to find." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so tender it brought tears to her eyes. Then, when you are well, may I court you properly? May I take you to church socials and town dances and anywhere else you want to go?" "Yes," she said, smiling through her tears. 1,000 times yes. The courtship that followed was the talk of Benton. Vincent came calling every evening once Rebecca was back on her feet, bringing flowers from his landlady's garden and sweets from the general store. They walked together through town, chaperoned at first by Catherine, and then, as time went on and their commitment to each other became obvious, allowed more freedom. They talked for hours about everything: their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Rebecca learned that Vincent had come west from Virginia after the war had taken his father and older brother, that he had worked his way up from nothing to save enough money to eventually buy his own land. Vincent learned that Rebecca had wanted to be a teacher since she was a little girl, that she loved poetry and music, that she had a wicked sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh until his sides hurt. They went riding together up into the mountains, though never as far as Sawback Ridge. That place held too many dark memories, though Vincent noticed Rebecca always looked in that direction with a thoughtful expression, as if she was processing what had happened there. One warm spring day, 5 months after the blizzard, she finally asked him to take her back to the spot where he had found her. The overhang looked smaller in the sunshine, less menacing. Rebecca stood there for a long time, her hand in Vincent's, and he stayed quiet, letting her have whatever moment she needed. "I thought I was going to die here," she finally said. "I made my peace with it. And then I heard your voice calling my name, and I knew I was going to live. I knew you would save me. I would have searched until I found you," he said simply. "Even if it had taken weeks instead of days, I would never have stopped looking." She turned to him then, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "I love you, Vincent Xavier. I think I started falling in love with you that morning when you carried me down the mountain, but it has been growing stronger every day since. You are the best man I have ever known." He kissed her then, properly, his arms around her waist and her fingers threading through his hair. The kiss was everything their first real kiss should be, passionate and tender, full of promise and hope. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Vincent dropped to one knee right there on that mountainside. "I do not have a ring yet," he said, "but I could not wait another moment. Rebecca Vaughn, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to make you as happy as you make me?" "Yes," she said, pulling him back to his feet so she could kiss him again. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married that summer in the little church in Benton, with what seemed like the entire town crammed into the pews to witness the union. Rebecca wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, and Vincent wore a new suit that had cost him a month's wages, but was worth it to see the way Rebecca's eyes lit up when she saw him waiting at the altar. Samuel walked his daughter down the aisle with tears streaming down his weathered face, and when he placed her hand in Vincent's, he whispered, "Take care of her." "With my life," Vincent promised, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. The reception was held in the town hall, with fiddle music and dancing and more food than anyone could possibly eat. Vincent had never been much of a dancer, but he waltzed with his bride until his feet ached, memorizing the way she laughed and the way her face glowed with happiness. When they finally slipped away to the small house Vincent had built on the property he had purchased just east of town, the moon was high and bright, and the night air was sweet with the scent of honeysuckle. "Alone at last," Rebecca said as Vincent carried her over the threshold, another tradition he had insisted on despite her protests that she could walk perfectly well on her own. "Alone at last," he agreed, setting her down gently and then just looking at her, his wife, his love, his miracle. "I still cannot quite believe you are really mine." "Believe it," she said, starting to unpin her hair. I am yours and you are mine, and nothing is ever going to change that. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other that left them both breathless and amazed. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Vincent traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder while she told him about the future she saw for them. Children, she said. At least 3, maybe 4 if we are blessed. I want that too, he murmured. A whole house full of noise and laughter. And I will keep teaching, at least until the babies come. I love those children at the school too much to give them up just yet. You should never have to give up something you love. We will figure it out together. That was how they approached everything in those early months of marriage. Together. When the roof leaked during a storm, they fixed it together. When Rebecca's garden needed tending, Vincent helped her plant and weed. When Vincent had to drive a herd of cattle to market in Little Rock, Rebecca went with him, turning it into an adventure. They worked hard and laughed often and fell more deeply in love with each passing day. The first winter of their marriage brought heavy snows, and Rebecca grew quiet and tense as December approached. Vincent understood without her having to explain. The anniversary of her near death was weighing on her, bringing back memories she had tried to put behind her. He made sure they stayed close to home during the worst of the weather, made sure the woodpile was always stocked and hot coffee was always brewing. On the exact anniversary of the day she had been lost, he woke her before dawn and bundled her into warm clothes. "Where are we going?" she asked, still sleepy. "You will see." He drove them in the wagon to the base of Sawback Ridge, where the first rays of sunlight were just starting to paint the snow-covered peaks pink and gold. He had brought a picnic breakfast, hot cocoa in a thermos, and thick blankets. They sat together in the wagon bed, watching the sunrise, and Vincent held her close. "1 year ago, I almost lost you," he said quietly. "Today, I want to celebrate that I did not. I want to celebrate every day I get to have with you, every sunrise we get to see together. What happened up there was terrible, but it also brought us together. I cannot regret anything that led to us." Rebecca wiped at her eyes. "How did I get so lucky to find you? I think I am the lucky one. You could have had any man in the territory, and somehow you chose me. I chose you because you are good and brave and kind. Because you make me laugh and you listen when I talk, and you never try to make me smaller than I am. I chose you because loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done." They stayed on that mountainside until the sun was fully up, talking and holding each other and healing something that had been wounded. When they finally drove back to town, Rebecca felt lighter, as if she had set down a burden she had been carrying. Spring came, and with it, joyful news. Rebecca was pregnant. The morning sickness was brutal for the first few months, and Vincent hovered anxiously, bringing her ginger tea and crackers and anything else that might help. She had to stop teaching in her 4th month, when standing for long periods became difficult, and she fretted about her students until the school board found a temporary replacement she approved of. "You will go back after the baby comes," Vincent assured her. "The children love you. They will wait for you." The pregnancy progressed normally, and Rebecca bloomed as her belly grew. Vincent could not stop marveling at the changes in her body, at the proof of the life they had created together. He talked to the baby through her stomach, telling stories and singing off key lullabies that made Rebecca giggle. They prepared the nursery together, painting it a soft yellow that would work for either a boy or a girl, and Catherine donated the cradle that both Rebecca and her late brother had slept in. On a warm October evening, Rebecca's water broke. Vincent sent for the midwife and Dr. Harrison, then held his wife's hand through hours of labor that left him feeling helpless and terrified. Rebecca was strong, though, stronger than he had known, and when their son finally came into the world wailing and pink and perfect, Vincent wept openly. "A boy," the midwife announced, placing the baby on Rebecca's chest. "A healthy, beautiful boy." "Hello, little one," Rebecca murmured, exhausted but radiant. "Hello, my sweet baby." They named him Samuel Vincent, after both their fathers, and the boy had his mother's brown eyes and his father's dark hair. Vincent was utterly besotted from the first moment, staying up through the night to rock the baby when he fussed, changing diapers without complaint, staring at the tiny miracle they had made with wonder. Fatherhood suited him. He was patient and gentle and completely devoted. Rebecca watched him with their son and fell in love with him all over again, seeing new depths to the man she had married. Samuel was only 6 months old when Rebecca discovered she was pregnant again, a surprise that left them both laughing and slightly panicked. "We wanted a house full of children," Vincent said, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his hands on her still flat stomach. "Looks like we are getting our wish." The second baby, a girl they named Catherine Rose, arrived 14 months after her brother. She had Rebecca's auburn hair and Vincent's green eyes, a combination that was startlingly beautiful even when she was red-faced and screaming. Samuel was fascinated by his little sister, wanting to help with everything, and Vincent spent his days juggling a toddler and an infant with the patient good humor that defined him. Rebecca went back to teaching part-time when Catherine was a year old, and Vincent adjusted his work schedule to be home with the children when she was at the school. They were busy and exhausted, and happier than either of them had ever imagined possible. The little house rang with laughter, and sometimes with tears, with the constant noise of a young family, and Vincent could not imagine wanting anything different. The years flowed by in a river of ordinary moments that somehow added up to an extraordinary life. Samuel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and learning like his mother. Catherine was wild and fearless, climbing trees and catching frogs and keeping her parents on their toes. When Samuel was 5 and Catherine 3, Rebecca got pregnant again, and this time they had another boy, James Edward, who was easygoing and sweet-natured from the start. Vincent expanded the house as their family grew, adding rooms and a bigger kitchen. He also bought more land, building his ranching operation into something substantial and successful. Rebecca continued teaching, beloved by generation after generation of Benton's children, and she wrote articles about education for newspapers across Arkansas that brought her a degree of local fame. They made time for each other despite the chaos of raising 3 children and running a ranch and a teaching career. Once a month, Rebecca Vaughn would take the children for the evening, and Vincent and Rebecca would have dinner alone, talking and laughing and reconnecting. They still walked together in the evenings when weather permitted, still held hands like newlyweds, still looked at each other with the same love and desire that had brought them together all those years ago. When Samuel was 10, he asked his father about the story everyone in town seemed to know. "Is it true you saved Mama from a blizzard, that you rode all night to find her?" Vincent looked over at Rebecca, who was listening from where she sat mending shirts. "It is true," he said. "Your mother was lost in the mountains and I went looking for her. Were you scared? Terrified?" But sometimes being scared does not matter. Sometimes you have to do the hard thing anyway, because the alternative is unthinkable. What was the alternative? Living in a world without your mother, without you and your sisters and brother. That blizzard was the worst night of my life, but it was also the beginning of the best life I could have imagined. Rebecca set down her mending and came to sit beside Vincent, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Your father is a hero," she told Samuel. "Not just because he saved me that night, but because he has been choosing to be brave and good and loving every day since. That is what real heroism looks like." Samuel seemed satisfied with that answer, and the conversation moved on to other things. But that night, after the children were asleep, Rebecca pulled Vincent out onto the porch where the stars were bright overhead. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked. "Do you ever regret going after me?" "Never," he said firmly. "Why would you even ask that?" "Because it cost you. Frostbite on your hands that still bothers you when it is cold. That scar on your leg from where thunder stumbled and you got caught in the stirrup. You could have died, Vincent. But I did not die. I found you and I got to have this life with you. Every ache and pain is worth it. 1,000 times over it is worth it." She kissed him then, soft and lingering. "I love you. I do not say it enough, but I love you so much it sometimes scares me." "I love you too. Always have, always will." Time continued its relentless march. The children grew and changed, developing their own personalities and dreams. Samuel wanted to be a lawyer, spending hours reading law books Vincent borrowed from the circuit judge. Catherine surprised them all by developing a talent for drawing and painting, filling the house with sketches and watercolors. James was still young enough that his ambitions changed by the week, but he was kind to everyone and had a way with animals that reminded Vincent of himself at that age. Vincent was 41 when Rebecca told him she was pregnant for the 4th time. They had not been planning for another baby, had assumed their family was complete, but the news filled Vincent with the same wonder and joy as the first time. "We are going to have a baby," he said, grinning like a fool. "At our age." "At our age," Rebecca agreed, laughing. "The older children are going to be mortified." They were at first, but the mortification gave way to excitement as Rebecca's pregnancy progressed. Samuel, now 13, became protective of his mother, insisting on carrying anything heavy. Catherine, 11, started sewing baby clothes with more enthusiasm than skill. James, 8, simply announced he wanted a brother because he was outnumbered by sisters. This pregnancy was harder on Rebecca than the previous ones had been. She was tired more often, her back ached constantly, and Dr. Harrison watched her carefully. Vincent tried not to let his worry show, but Rebecca knew him too well. "I am fine," she assured him one evening as they lay in bed, his hand on her swollen belly feeling the baby kick. "Just older than I was with the others. Everything is going to be fine." "I know," he said, though his heart clenched with fear. The thought of losing her, after all these years, after building this life together, was unbearable. The baby came 2 weeks early on a snowy January morning, almost exactly 15 years after Vincent had ridden into that blizzard to find Rebecca. Labor was long and difficult, and Vincent paced outside their bedroom door while the midwife and doctor worked. Samuel kept his younger siblings calm, but Vincent could see the fear in his son's eyes, could see his own terror reflected there. And then he heard it, the lusty cry of a newborn. The bedroom door opened and the midwife came out smiling. "You have another daughter, Vincent, and Rebecca is tired but well. You can go in now." He stumbled into the room to find Rebecca propped up against pillows, holding a tiny bundle. She looked exhausted but triumphant, and when she smiled at him, Vincent felt his world settle back into place. "Meet our daughter," Rebecca said. "I was thinking we might name her Hope." "Hope," Vincent repeated, sitting on the edge of the bed and carefully touching the baby's tiny hand. "It is perfect. She is perfect. You are perfect." "We did it," Rebecca said softly. "We made it through." "Of course we did. We are a team, remember? We can get through anything together." Baby Hope was adored by her older siblings who fought over who got to hold her and help with her. She grew into a happy, healthy baby with Rebecca's smile and Vincent's green eyes, and she completed their family in a way none of them had known they needed. The years that followed were full and rich. Samuel went off to university in Little Rock to study law, the first of their children to leave home. It was hard on both Vincent and Rebecca, seeing their firstborn set out on his own, but they were so proud of the man he was becoming. Catherine developed her artistic talents, eventually selling her paintings and even getting a commission to paint a mural in the new town hall. James discovered a love of horses and helped Vincent expand the ranching operation, the two of them working side by side. Hope grew up in a house full of love and laughter, the baby of the family, doted on by everyone. She had her father's stubborn determination and her mother's quick mind, a combination that promised great things. Vincent and Rebecca aged gracefully together. Gray threaded through their hair, lines appeared on their faces, but they were still each other's greatest love, still partners in everything. They celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a party that brought friends and family from all over the state. Samuel came home with a young woman he introduced as his fiancée, bringing tears of joy to Rebecca's eyes. Catherine gave a speech about what it meant to have parents who loved each other so obviously and completely, who had shown all of them what a real marriage should look like. Vincent stood to toast his wife, and the room fell quiet. 20 years ago, I married the woman who had already stolen my heart, he said. But it really started 20 years before that, on a December night when I rode into a blizzard because I could not bear the thought of losing her. That night taught me something important, that love is not just about the easy moments and the good days. Love is about the hard choices and the desperate times and the moments when you have to decide what you are willing to sacrifice. I would have given anything to save Rebecca that night, and I would still give anything now. She is my heart, my home, my everything. Here is to 20 more years and 20 after that, and however many more we are blessed to have together. Rebecca was crying openly by the time he finished, and when he kissed her, the room erupted in applause and cheers. It was a perfect moment, a crystallization of everything they had built together. Samuel married his sweetheart in a ceremony the following spring, and Rebecca and Vincent became grandparents a year later when their first grandson was born. Catherine married a fellow artist and moved to St. Louis but came home often, bringing sketches and stories of city life. James took over more of the ranching operation as Vincent began to slow down, though Vincent insisted he was not ready to fully retire yet. Hope grew into a smart, beautiful young woman who wanted to follow in her mother's footsteps and become a teacher. Rebecca tutored her herself, passing on everything she had learned over decades in the classroom, and watching her youngest daughter bloom into an educator filled her with profound satisfaction. Vincent was 52 when Rebecca came to him with a concern. She had found a lump in her breast, and though she tried to play it down, he could see the fear in her eyes. Dr. Harrison examined her and confirmed what they both dreaded. It was cancer. The prognosis was uncertain. With rest and care, she might have years, but it would be a fight. Vincent refused to fall apart, though inside he was screaming. He threw himself into caring for Rebecca, making sure she was comfortable, bringing her anything she needed. The children rallied around their mother, coming home to spend time with her, bringing the grandchildren to lift her spirits. Rebecca bore it all with grace and courage, the same qualities she had shown in everything else in her life. There were hard days when the pain was bad and the treatments made her sick. There were days when Rebecca was too weak to get out of bed, when Vincent would lie beside her and hold her hand and tell her stories of their life together. But there were also good days, days when she felt strong enough to sit in the garden or walk around the property or play with her grandchildren. One evening, 2 years into her illness, Rebecca asked Vincent to take her up to Sawback Ridge. He hesitated, worried about her strength, but she insisted. "I need to see it one more time," she said. Please." He could not deny her anything, so he prepared the wagon with every comfort he could think of and drove them slowly up into the mountains. It was summer, and the place that had nearly killed her was green and alive with wildflowers. They sat together on a blanket, looking out over the valley where Benton was a tiny collection of buildings far below. "I have been thinking about that night," Rebecca said. "About how close I came to dying here, and I realized something. I am not afraid anymore. Not of death, not of anything. Because I have had such a beautiful life, Vincent. I have been so deeply loved, and I have loved so deeply in return. Whatever happens next, I am ready for it." "I am not," Vincent said roughly. "I am not ready to lose you. I do not know how to exist in a world where you are not beside me." "You will learn," she said gently, taking his face in her hands. "Because you are strong and because our children and grandchildren will need you. But Vincent, my love, I need you to promise me something. Anything. I need you to promise that you will keep living after I am gone. Really living, not just going through the motions. Find joy. Laugh. Love our family. Do not spend whatever years you have left mourning me." "I will mourn you every day for the rest of my life," he said, tears streaming down his face. "You are my heart. I am your heart, and I will always be with you. But you have to promise me you will keep going. For our children, for our grandchildren, for me." "I promise," he whispered. "But you have to promise me something too. You have to promise to fight. Do not give up. We have beaten impossible odds before, Rebecca. We can do it again." "I will fight," she agreed. "For as long as I can, I will fight." She fought for another year, defying the doctor's expectations, holding on through sheer force of will and the love that surrounded her. She saw Samuel's second child born, a daughter they named Rebecca after her. She saw Catherine come home with the news that her work had been accepted into a prestigious gallery exhibition. She saw James marry a kind, strong woman who fit into the family as if she had always been there. She saw Hope graduate and get her first teaching position at the Benton School, where Rebecca herself had taught for so many years. On a quiet autumn evening, surrounded by her family, Rebecca Vaughn Xavier slipped away peacefully. Vincent was holding her hand, had been holding it for hours, and he felt the moment she left. The grief that crashed over him was overwhelming, drowning, but he held himself together because he had promised her he would keep living. The funeral was the largest Benton had ever seen. People came from across the state to pay their respects to the beloved teacher, the devoted mother, the woman who had touched so many lives. Vincent sat in the front pew of the church, his children on either side of him, and listened to person after person stand up and share stories about Rebecca. How she had taught them to read, how she had encouraged their dreams, how she had been kind when kindness was needed most. When it was his turn to speak, Vincent stood on shaking legs and faced the crowd. "My wife was the best person I have ever known," he said simply. "She was brilliant and funny and brave. She loved deeply and completely. 35 years ago, I rode into a blizzard to save her life, and people called me a hero for it. But Rebecca was the real hero. She saved me every single day we were together. She made me a better man, a better father, a better human being. And even though she is gone, she is still saving me because she taught me how to love, how to live, how to find meaning and joy in every moment. I will miss her until my last breath, but I will also celebrate that I got to have her at all. Not everyone is lucky enough to find the kind of love we shared. I was blessed beyond measure." He made it through the rest of the service without breaking down, though it cost him everything. When they buried Rebecca in the church cemetery with a headstone that read, "Beloved wife, mother, teacher, and friend," Vincent stood at her grave until long after everyone else had left. He told her about how proud he was of their children, about the life they had built together, about how much he missed her already. And he promised again that he would keep going, that he would honor her memory by living fully. The months that followed were the hardest of Vincent's life, harder even than that night searching for Rebecca in the blizzard. At least then he'd had hope, had been moving towards something. Now he had to learn how to be alone after decades of partnership, had to figure out who Vincent Xavier was without Rebecca beside him. His children helped. They came around often, brought the grandchildren, made sure he was eating and sleeping and taking care of himself. James and his wife moved into the main house, so Vincent was not completely alone, and Hope came by every day after school to have tea and talk. Slowly, painfully, Vincent learned how to live with the grief. It never went away, but it became something he could carry, something that shaped him rather than destroyed him. He threw himself into being a grandfather, spoiling his grandchildren shamelessly and teaching them everything he could. He helped James run the ranch, though he let his son make most of the decisions now. He sat on the porch in the evenings and remembered, and sometimes he talked to Rebecca as if she were still there, telling her about his day, sharing his thoughts. 3 years after Rebecca's death, on the anniversary of the blizzard, Vincent made the journey up to Sawback Ridge one last time. He was 60 now, feeling his age in his joints and his breathing, but he needed to make this pilgrimage. When he reached the spot where he had found her all those years ago, he sat on a rock and closed his eyes, remembering every detail of that desperate night. "I found you," he said aloud. "I searched for days and I never gave up, and I found you, and we had 35 beautiful years together. It was not enough, Rebecca. A lifetime with you was not enough, but it was everything. It was the whole world." He sat there for a long time, feeling the sun on his face, listening to the wind in the pines. And for just a moment, he could have sworn he felt a hand on his shoulder, gentle and familiar, and heard a voice whisper in his ear, "I love you. Always have, always will." Vincent lived for another 12 years, dying peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72. His children buried him beside Rebecca, and on his headstone they wrote, "He searched until he found her. He loved until his last breath." The funeral was large, though not as large as Rebecca's had been, but everyone agreed it was a fitting farewell to a good man who had lived a good life. The story of Vincent and Rebecca became legend in Benton, passed down through generations. The schoolteacher lost in the blizzard, and the cowboy who saved her, who fell in love and built a family and showed everyone what true devotion looked like. Their children prospered and had children of their own, carrying forward the legacy of love and strength and determination. Samuel became a respected lawyer who fought for justice for those who could not fight for themselves. Catherine's artwork hung in galleries across the country, but she always said her greatest masterpiece was the family her parents had built. James turned the ranch into one of the most successful in Arkansas, always making sure to give credit to the foundation his father had laid. Hope taught in Benton for 40 years, touching lives the way her mother had, inspiring generation after generation of children. And on snowy December nights, when the wind howled and the drifts piled high, people in Benton would look up at Sawback Ridge and remember the story. They would remember that love makes people brave, that true devotion never gives up, that the best love stories are not the easy ones but the ones where people fight for each other against all odds. They would remember Vincent and Rebecca, and they would know that love like that, once found, never really dies. It lives on in the children raised, in the lives touched, in the example set for how to love completely and without reservation. The little house Vincent had built still stood decades later, lived in by his great-grandchildren, and in the living room hung Catherine's painting of her parents. Vincent and Rebecca were young in the portrait, standing together on their wedding day, looking at each other with such love that everyone who saw it felt moved. Underneath, a small plaque read, "He searched for days and never gave up. She was lost in the snowy mountains. They found each other and never let go." And that, in the end, was the truest summary of their story. Two people who found each other in the most desperate of circumstances, who chose love when it would have been easier to give up, who built something beautiful and lasting from a foundation of devotion and determination. Their story was a testament to the power of love, the importance of never giving up, and the truth that some things are worth any sacrifice. The mountains still stood. Snow covered each winter, beautiful and deadly. But they also stood as a monument to Vincent and Rebecca, to the night that brought them together, to the life they built in its aftermath. And in Benton, Arkansas, on cold winter nights when the snow fell heavy and the wind howled, grandparents told their grandchildren the story of the cowboy and the schoolteacher, reminding them that true love is worth fighting for, worth searching for, worth holding on to with everything you have. Because in the end, that is what matters. Not the easy paths or the simple choices, but the moments when we decide that some things, some people, are worth the hardest night of our lives. Vincent had ridden into that blizzard not knowing if he would find Rebecca, not knowing if they would both survive, but knowing he could not live with himself if he did not try. And because he made that choice, because he searched for days and never gave up, two people found a love that lasted a lifetime and echoed through generations. Their story became more than just a tale of survival. It became a lesson in what it means to truly love someone, to be willing to risk everything for them, to never stop fighting for them no matter how impossible the odds seem. It became an example for their children and grandchildren of what a marriage should look like: partnership, devotion, respect, and a love so deep that it survives even death. And perhaps that was Rebecca and Vincent's greatest legacy. Not the ranch or the artwork or the legal victories or the students taught, but the proof that love, real love, the kind that moves mountains and survives blizzards and endures all hardships, is real and possible and worth every sacrifice. They showed everyone around them what it looked like to choose each other every single day, to build something lasting from a foundation of mutual respect and deep affection. The years turned into decades, and the decades turned into a century, but in Benton, Arkansas, the story lived on. It lived on in the families descended from Vincent and Rebecca, who inherited their strength and determination. It lived on in the school where generations of teachers followed Rebecca's example. It lived on in the ranch that still bore the Xavier name. But most of all, it lived on in the hearts of people who heard it and were inspired to love more deeply, to fight more fiercely for what mattered, to never give up when the stakes were highest. Because that is what Vincent had taught them all on that desperate December night in 1881. That some things are worth dying for, and those same things are worth living for. That love is not just about the good times, but about the moments when you have to choose between the hard path and the easy one, and you choose hard because the alternative is unthinkable. That searching for days and never giving up is not just about finding someone lost in the mountains, but about every day of marriage, every challenge faced together, every moment when you have to decide whether to keep fighting or to give in. Vincent had chosen to keep fighting, and because of that choice, he and Rebecca had been given 35 years of marriage, 4 children, countless grandchildren, and a legacy that would endure long after they were both gone. It was more than worth it. It was everything. And on quiet evenings when the sun set over the mountains and painted them gold and purple, the descendants of Vincent and Rebecca would look up and remember, and they would know that they came from love, that they were built on a foundation of devotion and sacrifice, and that they carried forward a story worth telling. The little church where Vincent and Rebecca had married still stood, though it had been renovated and expanded over the years. The cemetery beside it held generations of their family, stone markers tracking the passage of time, but Vincent and Rebecca's graves were always covered in fresh flowers. People still visited, still paid their respects to the cowboy and the schoolteacher whose love story had become legend. And sometimes, on snowy December nights, people swore they could see two figures walking hand in hand through the streets of Benton. A tall man with green eyes and a woman with auburn hair, still together, still in love, still proving that some bonds are stronger than death itself. It was probably just shadows and wishful thinking, but the people of Benton liked to believe it was real, liked to think that love that strong, that pure, that devoted, could not be contained by something as simple as mortality. Because in the end, Vincent and Rebecca's story was not really about death or survival or even about the blizzard that brought them together. It was about choice, the choice to love, the choice to fight, the choice to never give up, no matter how dark the night or how cold the storm or how impossible the odds. It was about choosing each other, every day in every way, and building something beautiful from that foundation of constant, unwavering choice. And that was a lesson worth remembering, worth retelling, worth living. That was the true legacy of the cowboy who searched for days and never gave up, and the schoolteacher who was lost in the snowy mountains. They found each other, they chose each other, and they showed the world what real love looks like. Their story was complete, their circle closed, their legacy secure. And in Benton, Arkansas, in the shadow of Sawback Ridge, their love lived on forever.